be taken on this platform, and we've answered some already. So some of you would have seen your questions already answered. Some of you would have seen that we have already kind of sent them to this meeting instead. So we will also, there are some others that we will want to look at in more detail and get some expertise from, and then we'll come back to you. So rest assured, if you have put a question through that we haven't yet answered, we are getting to you. We have seen every single question. So just a massive thank you for engaging in that platform, and say we will get to you. I'm going to do a few polls now. Before then, I will introduce the team that we've got here. So a few quick fire polls just to get us going, and then I'll go into the questions, and I'll introduce who we've got with us today after that. So the first poll that we have got is going to ask you about the hub. So a very, very simple question. Hope you can all see that and respond. It's, have you used the new hub yet? A yes or a no. I'm not sure as well, just in case people unsure if they have been on it or not. Just wait 10 more seconds or so while people just start filling that out. Okay, brilliant. So still quite a few of you yet to sign up. So we will do a few more mailings and kind of just let you have a little kind of, so you know how to use it and what the benefits of using it are. Some of you maybe kind of don't want to use it. Absolutely fine. You won't miss out on any information. And as I say, you won't miss out on seeing how we continue to use your insight and feedback to improve our service and some of the work that we're doing. The next poll is on contact preferences. So we're having a little look and looking at some of your feedback about which contact preferences we would like to, what kind of contact preference you would like from us. So I'll just launch this. So if you were to contact the Ombudsman for assistance, would you be most likely to do so via, and then which of these things? We have made it multiple choice just in case a couple of you wanted to do more than one. But it'd be really great to kind of hear that as well. So I'll just give that 10 seconds or so. You can see it's going up quickly. And if you are selecting other as one of these, please do put your answer about this in the chat. Just really good for us to kind of know what we are, what forms you are preferring. So 89% have said email, which is really interesting. 34% have put web form, 35% have put phone, only 6% post, and then 4% other. Obviously, as I say, people have picked multiple choice, but clear overwhelming for email. And then one final poll for this, and that's around social media. And just so, if we are talking to residents, if we are communicating with you via social media, what would you most like us to be informing you on? As most organizations, we're constantly reviewing this to make sure that we are reaching you in the best way possible. So really great to kind of have your feedback on this. And again, if you click other, please do put in the chat what, if we haven't kind of thought of a platform that you may be interested in. And I can see quite a few more people are selecting other this time around than they had the first time. So just give it a few more seconds. So clear kind of 56% for Facebook, and then X, Instagram, LinkedIn, all around 20%, and other on 20% as well. So really interested to hear your thoughts in the chat then about kind of what those other channels could be that we could use. And I'm sure that I can't see it just yet, but I'm sure that you are putting them in the chat. So thank you so much for that. Really do appreciate all of that feedback on the poll, because what this will do is just constantly mean that we improve our offer for yourselves, but also for wider residents as well, so that we can get a better understanding about how best we can reach residents and involve them in the decisions that we're making. So on to the main kind of event for this evening. This is a Meet the Ombudsman session, as you know, and thanks again for submitting those questions. This meeting, we've got 4 people from the Housing Ombudsman team with us today. So obviously I'm hosting, my name's Mark Lawrence. I should have probably introduced myself right at the start, but you know, I'll just introduce myself now. So I'm the communications manager and I'll be hosting. We've got Richard Blakeway, who is the Housing Ombudsman. We've got Andrea Keenoy, who is the Chief Operating Officer, Sharif Dibber, who is our Dispute Resolution Manager, and Mike DeBrion, who is our Dispute Support Manager. So we've got people from across the organisation and to be able to provide you with expertise on different parts of the casework journey as well. So we've got a selection of questions. I'll start shutting up now and let other people talk, and we will kind of go through those questions. Please do anything else you've got put in the chat. The first question that we've got for today is for yourself, Rick, if that's okay. And it's from someone called Mr. P. So apologies, I can't bring you in, Mr. P, because I'm not exactly sure who it is. But it says, I was told this quote by a surveyor. And it says, it doesn't matter what we say or do to tenants, we are never held accountable for our actions. There is only one person in the council that is accountable, and that's my boss. He reminds us of this every time we have a meeting. Is it true that they are not responsible? This kind of statement infuriates me. And he says he wants to fight this kind of thinking and behavior. And it's one thing for the rest of his life to change, and he wants to kind of like fight that, and he wants you to point him in the right direction. So is that a correct position from that survey?
Thanks so much, Mark, and thank you, Mr. P, for your question, and thank you to everyone who's joined us this evening. I think the question really speaks to kind of culture and behaviours, and so what's the culture of the organisation, and what are the behaviour? How does that affect the behaviours of employees? And whilst someone senior in the organisation will bear a degree of responsibility for a team, a directorate, or for the whole organisation, if you're the chief executive, clearly that only works if there's a framework of behaviours underneath that, which means that staff are behaving in the way which you would expect, that they're accountable for things that they're doing in their individual roles, and that the landlord itself in this context is accountable against its legal obligations or the commitments that it's made to its residents. So I think the kind of comments alluded to by Mr. P, I suppose, kind of speak to a little bit of kind of book passing or diffuse responsibilities and accountabilities, which is not healthy. Now, one of the things which we do as an organisation, obviously, is look at whether or not a landlord's met its obligations, and we do hold landlords to account in that way, but we do so in a way which also doesn't seek to kind of finger point or blame. Because I think also, in the way in which we do that work, if you end up with a blame culture, then actually you're probably going to drive behaviours which are less open, less transparent, and ultimately less accountable. Because people will be so worried if something's gone wrong that they're just going to end up with the blame. So, and actually what you want is people being really open and saying, look, how do we put this right? Or how do we learn if something's gone wrong? So I think a large bit of our work now is making sure that our decisions and the insights that we provide arising from our decisions really support landlords to embed the right culture around complaint handling, a positive culture around complaint handling, and that will ultimately drive improved services by landlords. Albeit it will take time, and I think increasingly I see a kind of disconnect between landlords saying they're doing more, that they're investing more, that they're rethinking how they do things, but then the lived experience of residents.
Thank you, Rick. The next question is around kind of the potential backlog, and there's some people have already mentioned it in the chat about kind of how the length of time for decisions being made by the Housing Ombudsman. And Andrew, if we could we come to you for this if it's okay? Someone's asked, is it about are we understaffed, underfunded, and by that they mean kind of by the government, and they say that the people in this room and all the people on the resident panel really want to help us and want us to kind of be as best as we can be, and how can they also provide help in this way? So a bit of a double question.
Okay, well, thank you for the question, and absolutely thank you for the offer of support. And there are absolutely some things resident panel can do, which I will come to in a second. Timescales and funding are really important issues. Absolutely, Rick and I completely acknowledge that. The rest of the leadership team acknowledges that as well. We look at this every month around, how are we doing on the timeliness of complaints, and we have targets around those as well that we kind of really measure our performance against, and maybe we'll come on to that in a second as well in the next question. But we are absolutely focused on this. To sort of just start at the beginning as well of why complaints maybe are taking longer than we would like to go through, and we do acknowledge at the moment some of the investigations are taking longer than we would like. But the reasons behind that is from about 2 years ago to last year, the volume of complaints that we received to investigate more than doubled. So we went from 4,000 complaints in a year in 21-22 to 8,200 nearly in 23-24. And that kind of growth in demand is really significant for us to deal with. We've been really responsive in trying to address that. We have brought in many more staff as well to then get those complaints investigated and sent back out to all of you. And we've not only brought resources in to do the investigation of complaints, but more resources as well to answer the phone, to kind of progress complaints when they're going through the landlord's process, to assess whether a complaint has got everything that it needs for us to investigate when it comes to us as well. So we are bringing, and we have brought in lots of resources to deal with that. We are still bringing in more resources to deal with that as well. But I think we also need to, we are really clear as well in the leadership team that people who are investigating complaints, they need to be properly trained. And we need to invest the time and effort into giving them the skills to be able to give you a quality investigation. And when we've had conversations with residents before, what they have been really clear with us about is that quality, actually, they would prefer quality over timeliness. So that's why there's been a bit of a lag of we've got the resources in. We're taking people through their 6 months of development before we sort of are getting significantly more numbers out. But actually what we've delivered in terms of determinations has grown a lot. We got over 5,000 complaints out last year. We are predicting even more this year as well. And so we are starting to turn the corner on timescales for determinations. They are coming down. So I can say a little bit more on that, as I said, in a second on the next question. But in terms of how the resident panel can help us, I would say a couple of things. So I think we've got a panel coming up in November that is covering our new corporate strategy and our business plan, and that will set out our thoughts around the kind of levels of service we want to deliver and where the fee will be. Really appreciate your thoughts on how we want to deliver that when we have that meeting. And then when we do the formal consultation with all stakeholders in January, sending in your responses on that will really help build up evidence for us to go back to the government and out to landlords to say, this is where the fee needs to be. This is where residents and landlords think it's reasonable level of service for us to deliver. This is what it will cost to deliver.
Thank you very much, Andrea, for that. And I think you alluded to the next question, and I will stay with you for it if that's okay. So it's from Chris, and he says he's a Newland Housing Association tenant and sits on their resident services committee. And yeah, he says something that's brought up is the time it takes for us to make a ruling on a complaint. Is there an estimated time for a ruling or an average about when someone should expect to receive a judgment?
Yeah, so as I indicated before, we have a number of targets in this space that we really do hold ourselves account to. They're broken down into sort of three areas. So our target for this year is to do 80% of all of our investigations within 12 months. Absolutely, we want to be pushing that up to be more like 100% next year once these resources that we've brought in are really fully up to speed. But we do expect actually that by the end of this year, 90% of complaints across the year will have been done within 12 months. And actually by the end of October, that we won't have any complaints taking more than 12 months. We just started the year with some older ones. They've all been dealt with and addressed. And so we will be delivering overall for the year 90% within 12 months. We've also forecast that we will deliver or we have a target around the number of complaints done within 6 months. And those are our high risk cases. And 97% of cases are going to be done within 6 months, we think, this year, compared to a target of 95%. So we're ahead of our targets. The targets are quite stretching for where we've been with that volume of cases coming in. And we will be looking in future plans to sort of stretch them further. So.
Thank you very much. There's been a few bits of chat about the about AABS Law already, and so I'm going to touch on that in the next question. If I could come to you, Rick, about how AABS Law may change damp and mold and also poor insulation as well.
Yeah, so to provide a bit of context in case anyone's unaware of AABS Law or the scope of AABS Law. So AABS Law, as I'm sure most of you will know, is named after the 2-year-old who died in Rochdale, Awab Ishaq, because of, following the coroner's inquest, prolonged exposure to damp and mold. The result of that was a piece of legislation called AABS Law, which will aim to ensure that there is a more systematic and rigorous and proactive approach to addressing hazards. Now, before the general election this year, the last government had consulted on the scope of AABS Law. And so the first thing I've got to say is that even though the new government has committed to introducing AABS Law and have committed to laying the regulations to introduce AABS Law by the end of this calendar year, by Christmas, the detail of what will actually be required to happen under AABS Law and when AABS Law itself will commence are yet to be set out by the new government. But they definitely do want to introduce AABS Law. So I think what we've got to do is kind of, respecting that, let's just kind of think about, well, what's it likely to be based on what we know the core attributes of AABS Law are. And I think there's a couple of things. I think firstly, it might not just be about damp and mold. Ministers will confirm this, but that's one hazard, a really significant hazard, but it's not the only legal hazard. There are 29 hazards that were set out about 20 years ago in legislation, and that will cover issues from noise to pests to electrics and so on. The other thing to say about AABS Law is what it does is it sets out a process for handling complaints, which I think is really welcome, because one of the things which we see in our investigations is different landlords have different approaches to essentially handling the same service request. So some landlords will consider emergency repairs need to be done in a certain timescale and in a certain way. Some landlords will consider that inspections should be done in certain circumstances, but not in other circumstances. And so there's a bit of a postcode lottery out there on how very similar requests are handled by different landlords. And given that social tenants have limited choice over who their landlord will be, I think it's really good that actually you start to get a level playing field. So probably what you would see, if we just look at the consultation document that was published by the previous government, you would see emergency repairs dealt with specifically within a certain time frame, and they would have to be resolved within that time frame. You would see residents receiving a written report of following an inspection that's happened. So you'll see inspections happening more frequently and more consistently, and you'll see written reports of the actions that need to happen after that inspection being provided by the residents, and then you provide it to the residents. And then you'll also see a commitment around works being done in a reasonable time frame. And if that doesn't happen, then the landlord and it's rate, and this has to happen before a complaint's made. This is in response to service requests. If after a complaint and the case comes to the ombudsman, then we can use the framework for AAABS law when it's set out in these regulations to decide whether or not the landlord's actions were reasonable, and it gives us greater teeth, if you like, to say that certain things need to happen in a certain way to fulfill the commitments under AABS law.
Thank you very much. And the next question, we've got a couple of questions that I'm going to put to Mike, if that's okay. And it's one's from Richard, one was from someone called Dr. Ziggy, who asked kind of what can a tenant do if the landlord just doesn't respond to a complaint at all, leaving the tenant in the dark for weeks about what's going on, or appears to kind of ignore issues or complaints that are being made.
Thanks, Mark, and thanks for the question, Dr. Ziggy. So the best thing someone could do, so landlords have set timeframes to respond to complaints. Those timeframes are set out in our complaint handling code, which is available on our website if you're not aware of that. If the landlord exceeds those time limits, then the best thing the resident can do is to provide us with a copy of the complaint that they've submitted to their landlord. For complaints that have been raised verbally, what we'd need is as much detail as possible about when and to who that complaint was raised. So names, dates, times, you know, who it was that you spoke to, if you know the job title, how it was raised. Was it over the telephone? Was it kind of verbally with a, you know, a warden on site or something like that? Once we've got that information from the resident, that then enables us to be able to contact the landlord and kind of hold them accountable to those complaint handling code timeframes. So basically, as long as we can see the date the complaint was raised, that it was sent to the landlord, and that the code response timeframe has elapsed, they're kind of the three things we need for us to be able to kind of get in touch with the landlord and ensure that they are responding to that complaint. We wouldn't need the resident to do anything else on that complaint. It would be down to us to then get the landlord to respond. That, of course, takes us time to do that, though, but the resident isn't expected to do any more during that time. It's with us. We'll pursue the landlord and make sure that a response is provided. The only thing we'd need from the resident is, if they do receive a response, to kind of let us know and share a copy of that response to us, so that we can give you support on how to take that complaint further, if that's something you're wanting to do.
Thank you very much, Mike. Really appreciate that answer. The next question is from Gitana, and Sharif, I'll come to you if that's okay on this one.
Yeah.
It's is the landlord obliged to designate a parking space for electric vehicles near to the houses so it'd be possible to charge their vehicle? This person says they don't have a designated spaces in the car park. They often have to park too far away to be able to charge the car. And what are policies for this in general?
Thanks for the question, Katana. So from my knowledge, I don't believe that landlords are required to provide a designated parking space. Obviously, the landlord has a responsibility to provide housing, and that's to a decent standard. But the decision to buy an electric vehicle that requires a charging spot won't necessarily be something that the landlord has to accommodate, and nor is it a charge that the landlord necessarily has to bear. Particularly, if it doesn't set out in the tenancy agreement that parking is a provision that it will provide as part of the occupancy. There will be instances where individuals may have obtained funding for electric vehicles and charging points due to, for example, a disability, and that may be granted by a local authority. But then it raises the question of whether it can practically be installed. Whether the landlord is obligated to permit that installation, and whether in consideration of whether it poses any risks or any issues for its other residents. Local authorities do generally seek to encourage residents to use more electric vehicles to reduce emissions. And I believe that there is a law that asks them to accommodate that within their borough. But I'm unaware of any specific requirements that require them to provide designated parking spots for vehicles that need to be charged.
Thank you, Sharif. Following on from that, I just want to stay with you if that's okay.
Yeah,
and this Layla has asked that landlords routinely use short-term solutions to resolve long-term problems. For example, painting over mold instead of kind of dealing with the underlying cause. What powers do the Ombudsman have to ensure that landlords resolve an issue rather than use these quick fixes?
Thanks for the question, Layla. So as a service, we require landlords to undertake repairs that are effective and long-lasting. We wouldn't expect a landlord to superficially treat an issue or to undertake like a surface repair without addressing the root cause. And through our investigations, we call out landlords that may have repeatedly attempted to address an issue but failed to consider, the underlying issues and causes. And we have the power to order their landlords to source and identify the cause of the issue, ensure that there's a lasting fix, and that is put in place. And we also order landlords to undertake follow-up inspections where we think it's most appropriate, and to confirm for all parties that the issue is well and truly resolved. That doesn't mean that there won't be occasions or that the resident will never experience the issue again, but it means that the resident shouldn't experience the same issue caused by the same underlying cause. The issue could, if it's damp and mold, for example, it could be caused by another issue in another area of the property. So it's not to say that they will never experience damp and mold again. But specific to damp and mold, as Rick's mentioned, AABS Law, when it is finalized, will hopefully set strict requirements for social landlords to address hazardous conditions, and to consider and put in place and require landlords to do so within specific time limits. Emphasize, accountability for imposing sort of, proper and lasting solutions. And then also sort of highlight the need for transparency, so appropriate record keeping, so that we can hold a landlord accountable. And we've recently, if you have been on our website, you would have seen that we had a spotlight report on damp and mold. Last year we reviewed that in light of the things that the landlords had told us, our investigation and our knowledge to date. And we emphasize things like landlords undertaking proper MOTs of properties so that they could understand and learn the conditions of their stock, the sort of issues that were likely to arise and cause issues such as damp and mold, and to take proactive action as opposed to reactive action. Thank
you very much. The next question is from DL, and Rick, I'll come to you if this is okay. It says, what action is the Ombudsman taking to tackle the inaccessible housing crisis for 400,000 wheelchair users currently in inaccessible housing? Can the Ombudsman force housing associations to make their homes more accessible? Oh, sorry, you're on mute. Yeah,
that worked.
Yeah, cool. All good. Yeah.
Thanks, DL. A really important question, and I think, and evidently, an even more important question in terms of the context of changes in society. The largest growth in that we're going to see over the next few years, growth in terms of the population, are people who are over 70. And whilst it's not, you might need a home adapted at any age. Potentially, as you get older, your needs and requirements might change in the property. I think at the heart of this is a landlord ensuring that they are really clear and open with residents about how they can get an occupational therapist to consider their needs, the residents' needs in a property, and then respond to any recommendations made in a really transparent, clear, and an effective way. And it might be in some circumstances, and I've certainly seen this in cases, that it's not possible to make the adaptations that are required. But in those circumstances, it's important that a landlord considers, well, what alternatives are there? For example, is there a management move that might be appropriate or possible to ensure that a resident doesn't experience difficulties in using the home in which they live? But in many instances, landlords will also be able to make adaptations which are appropriate, are reasonable, and are going to make a real difference for residents. There's a wider issue, which is about sometimes the disconnect between homes which have been built specifically for residents with certain requirements, such as wheelchair usage, and then the allocation of those homes, or the letting of those homes to residents with those needs. That's something which kind of sits a bit beyond our responsibility as a landlord. But I think it is a really, really big issue. But for what we can do is we can certainly look at whether a landlord's listened to the needs of the resident, whether they've used appropriate specialist expertise to establish what might need to happen, and then whether they've responded reasonably to that.
Thank you very much. The next question we've got is from Christine. And Mike, if I could come to you again, if that's okay. And apologies, we shifted about a bit, but this came up a little bit in the chat as well about following Andrea's answer earlier. But it's how long should it take for a resident to receive an allocated caseworker? And what's the wait time for a caseworker to be getting in touch with a resident?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Really important question. It's something that we're working really hard on, as kind of Andrea alluded to earlier. And we brought a lot of people in recently to try and help us improve our response times. But essentially, it depends what you mean by an allocated caseworker, really. The initial processes that we use here at the Housing Ombudsman Service don't require a dedicated caseworker. Essentially, cases are in kind of a shared team ownership initially. They are picked up on a kind of case-by-case basis as we receive contact from residents. That contact is dealt with. We do what we need to do to progress that complaint for that person, and that case then goes back into team ownership. For the kind of that stage of our process, you're looking at somewhere in the region of 40 working days, which is about 8 weeks currently, depending on the communication method. Of course, obviously for vulnerable tenants that have called us, those calls can be put straight through to a dispute resolution support officer to deal with that kind of initial call for that person. But for things like email, web complaint forms, they take a little bit longer for us to respond to. The next stage of our case process is kind of the more detailed casework, or where the landlord's complaints procedure is completed and we've received a copy of the final response. Those cases are passed to a different step of our process, and the wait times for a case to be kind of allocated to a caseworker there is somewhere in the region of 8 to 12 weeks. That will be picked up by a caseworker at the end of that point. Residents are also informed before they go into that queue of that wait time. We will send you an email or speak to you over the phone to say that we are sending you into this queue to be allocated to a caseworker, and this is the current wait time of that queue. You will then also be contacted by the caseworker at the other end of that queue. When that case is picked up, the caseworker will reach out and make contact with you to let you know that they've picked your case up and do whatever it is that they need to do with that case. From that point on, it kind of leaves my area of expertise. So if it's okay, I'm going to pass over to Sharif here to just kind of pick up where I've left off there.
Sorry, it wouldn't let me unmute for a second. So it will then move over to the dispute resolution space, and a request will go out to the landlord, but also to the resident to acquire as much information as possible. Usually we give the landlord about 3 weeks to return with all of the information we need. And we will make contact with all parties once we have received the information and confirm that the case is now ready to be allocated for investigation. Generally in that pool, depending on the priority and how old the case is, the case should be allocated roughly, I say, between 6 to 8 weeks, and then picked up. And from that point, so that's the point where you will have a caseworker that will see the complaint through to determination. From that point, we say that the case should be turned around within 4 weeks, ideally. So we may, depending on the size of the case, suggest that it could take a little bit longer, but generally it should be turned around within 4 weeks. And so by that time, you should have a decision.
Very much. Thank you. The next question we've got is from Isabel, and it says, does a social provider have a duty of care to other tenants, right to feel safe in and around their home when they're placing a tenant? For example, if the housing provider knowingly is placing kind of ASB tenants in different places. So Sharif, if I could stay with you for that.
Unmute? Has that unmuted me?
Yeah,
it has unmuted me. Sorry. Okay, yeah. I mean, all tenants have a right to feel safe, and landlords do have an obligation to ensure that residents are able to, you know, live in their homes, enjoy their homes without fear, without harassment, and without annoyance. Where a landlord has a particular concern for, I guess, the well-being of residents, and a property has become vacant, it may list the property and seek to fit it sensitively. So a sensitive let would usually require a number of sort of, you know, key criteria to be satisfied before a resident can move in. And that may be, you know, that the individual has no criminal cases in the last few years, no history of drug abuse, is in full-time employment, those sorts of things. And sensitive lets can be both about the individual looking to take up occupancy, but can also be about or concerned about the historical experiences that neighboring properties have gone through. And what a landlord should do in those instances is just be conscious of the feedback that is received from those residents. But what the landlord probably couldn't do is preempt or assume that an individual will cause issues to others, even if at one point or another there has been suggestions that the individual could have been problematic. It would be inappropriate for the landlord to refuse a house to a resident who had a sort of fair entitlement to social housing if it hadn't, I mean, if the individual had satisfied the right processes and if there was no sort of sensitive let requirements. But the short answer will be yes, the landlord does have a duty of care to ensure that it doesn't place individuals that are considered to be particularly problematic where there is a need for a sensitive let.
Thank you very much, Sharif. Really great answer. Thank you. The next question is from James Hennigan, and it's for Rick, if that's okay. And it's can you tell me if window replacement becomes repaired or replaced on a triage basis and no longer a cyclical improvement or replacement? And how will the landlords be able to retrofit those homes and allocate funding in their budget, or indeed implement a budget for those kind of net zero targets and cladding and high-rise buildings? So kind of how do landlords tackle that, for example, kind of recruitment, lack of skills and lack of qualified repairs staff as well? I think I've unmuted you. Sorry about that.
Oh, you're okay.
Thank you.
So there's a lot in that question. And Windows is one of those areas where we've shared with landlords some of the concerns that we have about the handling of window repairs and the interface between responsive repairs and then cyclical works. I think, I suppose, stepping back, you know, why do windows need to be replaced in a building, or when and how are windows addressed in the building? And there are some requirements under the current Decent Home Standards around window maintenance and windows replacement, and then there might be requirements that come about through other measures such as energy efficiency. In between, and the landlord should set out transparently how and when they're going to do those works, and there can be, very evidently from our casework, some risks that planned works don't happen for various reasons: budget, availability of materials, availability of labour. So there can definitely be some slippage in those programs, and that can clearly cause frustration for residents. But ultimately, a landlord should be setting out pretty clearly when and how they approach works like major cyclical works like windows. It's worth saying as an aside that can also have quite significant implications for leaseholders living in a block versus social tenants. One of the issues though that we've highlighted is, well, what happens if something goes wrong with a window before those cyclical works? And we've had cases where windows have been boarded up for 4 years. We've had cases where residents have been unable to fully open or fully close their windows. And in response, sometimes landlords have said, well, we're going to deal with that, but we're going to deal with it as part of our cyclical works. But those cyclical works could be years away. And from a landlord's perspective, trying to manage their budgets and trying to manage lots of works, they're trying to fit it in those cyclical works. But from a resident's perspective, that obviously is too long to wait. And actually, from a statutory perspective, if there's a hazard presenting there, it may be it's unreasonable potentially for a landlord to leave a replacement for that long. It may be reasonable for them to do an interim repair, but again, the landlord needs to be really confident that that's addressing the issues that the residents raising. So those are some of the issues that we see in Windows works. I think the final word I'd have on it is that the government has committed to a new decent home standard. The current one's 20 years old. And they've also committed to making that standard universal across the rented sector. So private landlords as well as social landlords would need to meet it. We don't know what's in that decent home standard yet. Government needs to set that out. But given windows were part of the original decent home standard, it's obviously going to be a consideration for the next one. And it's obviously going to have to be considered in the context of wider commitments around energy efficiency. So I think you're going to hear a lot more about this, and you're going to see a lot more focus on major works and what those works are about.
Thank you very much for that, Rick. Sharif, if I could come to you for the next question, and it's from Kenya Sue, and it's we find it extremely difficult to make contact or obtain responses from our local authority due to the hybrid working that's now in place. Is this a factor when looking at complaints or in investigations by the Housing Ombudsman? You again, apologies.
All right. So yeah, I mean, absolutely a factor that we consider. Landlords should absolutely offer a response within the appropriate timescales, irrespective of any sort of flexible or hybrid working arrangements. The landlord should have a service level agreement that sets out, when it will respond, how it will respond to calls, emails, or contact in general, and we expect them to stick to that. And the Ombudsman also has clear expectations where complaints are made, and as Mike said earlier, that's also set out in our complaint handling code. So we've set out specific timeframes within which we expect the landlord to respond to resident complaints. We've made it compulsory for landlords to have specific complaint handling teams, bodies, a complaints officer, and for landlords to set out in good time any reasons why it may not be able to make contact or offer a response in good time. So we'd absolutely hold the landlord to account. We wouldn't consider a landlord's working patterns or location to be an acceptable excuse for a lack of contact. And I'd say, a high volume of our cases where we found some level of maladministration is partly due to the fact that, we've been displeased with the way that a landlord has communicated with a resident and a sort of real failure to manage their expectations.
Thank you very much. The next question is being asked by Joe, and Rick, if I could bring you in on this, if it's okay. And so what can the Housing Ombudsman do about service charge abuse?
Thanks, Joe, for the question. It depends what you mean by service charge abuse. So is that, for example, charges being made which are for things which actually aren't happening? So you're being charged, but you're not getting the service. Is it service charge abuse because there's just a lack of transparency and clarity about how those charges are being reached and whether proper processes are being gone through to come up with the charge? and so it kind of depends what you mean by service charge abuse. But for us, what can we do when we see a case around service charge? And we see lots of cases around service charges. And these are the kind of principal areas where we'll look at a case and the kind of things that we expect to see happen. So the first is that we'll consider whether or not the landlord has followed a proper process. If, for example, there's charges being introduced and they're required to go under a consultation process, like a Section 20 consultation process. We'll look at whether or not the landlord has communicated effectively with residents. And that word communication actually really means a lot. So, for example, our landlords being really transparent, really clear about why the charges are being made that are being made. And are they being open when residents are inquiring, well, you know, I don't understand this. Are they being open and transparent in response? And then the third area is that provision of services. So if residents are saying, look, I'm being charged for this, but I don't like the quality of the services that are being provided, or the services aren't being provided at all, that may be something that we look at as well. What we won't be able to do, because it's a matter that rests with the courts, with the first tier tribunal, is say that the level of the charge is unreasonable. So we might say, yeah, you're being charged for it, but you're not getting the service. We might make that decision, or we might say you're being charged for it, and actually we can see, you know, the service is being provided, or mistakes are being corrected that may have happened in the past, so the landlord's kind of dealing with it. But what we can't say is actually this charge is wrong, and the level of the charge should change. That is an issue for the tribunals. Service charges are an area, and I think that's always been, I think, a area of deep contention and deep upset and mistrust. And I think that's sometimes between leaseholders and landlords. And I think that's only increased with the cost of living crisis and, you know, and with some of the performance issues that have been seen. And I think therefore there's a really fractured relationship, I think, between some leaseholders and their landlord. We've provided reports looking at our casework in these areas, trying to both explain what we do, but also the difference that we've made in some cases. And if you have an opportunity to look at it on our website, you can see actually the impact that we've had, where we've had one complaint from a resident, we've investigated it, but we said, look, it's affected all of these other people, and those people also need to be provided with redress as well. And I think that's, you know, can be really, really impactful work.
Thank you very much. Really, and the chat always kind of goes crazy when we talk about service charges, because it's such an emotive issue for people. So anyone that has kind of put things in the chat from just then, but also for the wider bit of the meeting, then please do rest assured that we will look at all of them, and we will be kind of like looking at how we can respond to some of them using the Q&A, but also in some other places as well, and make sure that, as I said right at the start, that our information on our website is kept up to date. Those are all the questions that we had for today. I just wanted to reflect on something that a couple of people have messaged me directly about some comments that have been made in the chat that people have maybe felt as have been kind of a bit unacceptable and against some of the code of conduct. We will absolutely look into that and kind of respond afterwards. So thank you for kind of flagging that and bringing those to our attention. We'll definitely kind of be looking at that and talking about that with the person or people involved afterwards. So apologies for anyone who was kind of offended by some of that. So we will be looking at that over the coming days. I just want to say a massive thank you though to everyone that submitted a question, everyone who's been kind of talking in the chat and having a kind of like really good discussions and kind of feeding into the work that we're doing. As we said before, it's kind of absolutely key to what we want to do, to kind of keep hearing your views, to keep making sure that our service works for you. So thank you very much for all of that interaction, and a massive thank you to Rick, a massive thank you to Andrea, a massive thank you to Mike and to Sharif as well for answering those questions so honestly and kind of taking on any question that we threw at you. So thanks so much. And just for future resident panel meetings, we've got a special interest discussion on antisocial behaviour in the coming weeks. And then in November, as Andrea mentioned, we have also got some larger panel meetings. There's 2 of them, so you can kind of have a little decision about which one works best for you. But that will all be about feeding into our corporate plan. So that's everything for over the next 5 years. So a really great kind of opportunity to get involved with the work that we do and shape the service over the next 5 years. And your input will be absolutely vital to ensuring that it reflects what residents need from us over the next 5 years. So really do kind of get involved in those sessions. There will be more mailings and other ways to get involved over the next coming weeks as well. So lastly, thank you from me. Hope everyone has a lovely evening, and we'll see you soon. So cheers. Thank you.
Thanks everyone. Bye-bye.